Hello everyone, it's Hoplite Mike. I hope you're all doing well. Today we are back with Lord of the Rings Total War Remastered, and we're doing a faction guide and overview for the Elves of Lothlorien. You might remember them from the films, as the Fellowship does visit Caras Galadon on the way to Amon Hen, where they are ambushed by Lurtz. That's where they meet the Lady Galadriel. The Elves of Lothlorien are also the ones that come to Rohan's aid when they are ambushed at Helm's Deep. And that's why one of your generals is Haldir himself. The starting position is a bit precarious just because you have the Orc Rabbles, or the Goblins, to the west, Isengard to the south, and Mordor to the east at Dol Guldur. So you are surrounded on all sides by enemies, which means it can get a bit tricky if you don't hit the ground running and you can get overwhelmed. However, the Elves of Lothlorien are a very strong faction in terms of the units they have access to. So you've got the tools and capabilities to deal with your surrounding enemies. It's just a case of expanding fairly quickly in the early game and getting your recruiting capabilities up and running. So having said all that, I'm now going to proceed with the video. I'm going to do a section on the unique characters and generals, then run through how the economy works, then recruitment, and then lastly a full showcase of the roster on the battlefield. I'll start with the unique characters and generals. If we go to the family tree, we will see the faction leader is the Lady Galadriel. We've then got her husband Celeborn and two generals, Haldir and Rumil. Haldir being the general that led the Elves of Lothlorien to Helm's Deep to assist Rohan against the Uruk-hai of Isengard. The Lady Galadriel starts in Caras Galadon. She cannot be moved from this location for the duration of the campaign, but she will be there to defend it if it gets attacked. You've then got Celeborn, who starts just outside, Haldir, who starts to the northwest, and Rumil, who starts in Cairn Amroth. In terms of the models, the Lady Galadriel does have a custom model. I can't move her from the settlement, but I have run a campaign where I've let the settlement rebel, and she does come out at that point, so I'll just cut to that now so you can see the model. Celeborn also has a unique model, so I will just bring him out here so you can see it. It looks quite similar to the generic model. He's just got the blue cape and the blonde hair. Haldir and Rumil both have unique models as well, but they look very similar to the generic generals. They just have different hair. So I'll bring Haldir out now. So they look very similar to the Galadrim elite units. Then I'll move out Rumil. So their models look very similar to the generic models for the Elves of Lothlorien. They've just got the different hair, and I'll cut to the generic one now. So now we've covered all the different generals and their models. I'll go into the generals' bodyguard units. So both the Lady Galadriel and Celeborn have the Twilight Guard bodyguard unit, and this is not dissimilar to the bodyguard units for the other Elven factions. It's just a very tanky sword unit. It's got the high defense combined with the plus 3 hit points, which makes them very tough to kill, and then it's got decent melee attack as well. That's one of the reasons why the Elven factions are so powerful in the late game, because you can quite easily get 9, 10, 11 generals, and if you get a few of those into an army, that army will basically be unstoppable because there's very little that can beat these in one-to-one combat. The Twilight Guards are the generic general's bodyguard, so every general that spawns in after the start of the campaign will be this Twilight Guard unit. So both Galadriel and Celeborn have that unit. Haldir and Rumil have a different unit. They have the Galadrim Elite Sentinels. So this is a unique unit. It's not recruitable, but it is similar to the Galadrim Sentinels that you can get from tier 3 of the Forge, which are here. The difference between these and the Elite Sentinels is that the Elite Sentinels have +3 hit points, +1 defense, and +1 missile attack. So these are pretty strong units. They are melee, hybrid, archer, hybrid, melee, and arch units, and you don't want to lose them. The only thing to note is that they do have quite a low unit size. You start with 50, but they won't replenish above 28. So try not to lose them if you can. But yeah, overall a very strong unit that will definitely help in your campaigns there. So that's about it for the generals and unique characters. I'm now going to move on to how the economy works. In this section, we're going to run through how the economy works. In general, the Elven factions struggle to bring in a lot of money compared to other factions. It's not really their strong point, and that's due to some of the restrictions on the buildings they have access to. So if you go to any settlement and click on the income tab, you'll be able to see the 3 primary revenue streams, which are farming income, taxes, and trade. None of the Elven factions can build farms, so your farming income is never going to be that high, but there's nothing you can really do about that. The taxes is dependent on the level of population, and the inability to build farms also hurts you here because you miss out on the population growth that the farms give you access to. And then trading is just dependent on the resources you have and the settlements around about you. But what I found is that a lot of the regions in the forest areas don't have many trade routes. So for example, Caris Galadon can only trade with 1 settlement, and Cairn Amroth can only trade with 2. However, having said all that, I found the economy with the Elves of Lothlorien in particular to be not too bad as you progress later into the campaign, and I think that's primarily because of the regions around about you. So there are 3 very close regions, being Moria, Barak Meled, and Zag Kala, where you can build mines, which are one of the most lucrative buildings in the game. And you can pick those up fairly quickly and really bring in that income. Moria in particular starts off as a huge city, so straight away you can upgrade to the highest tier of the mines, which is tier 2 for the elves, and that will allow you to maximize your income there. There is also Kidrol Sin, where you can build mines as well, but that's a bit further away. So in terms of the actual building lines themselves, you've got the trader, which is here. So there are conditions attached to being able to build this particular building line. In order to build a trader, that settlement needs to have hidden resource men, elves, dwarves, or glass, which is also the hobbit resource. So that's not really a restricted building. You'll be able to build that in most regions that you conquer. So most regions that are inhabited by elves at the start of the game will have hidden resource elves, and then also some of the surrounding settlements as well, the surrounding rebel settlements, and you can tell which ones have hidden resource elves because of the look. It's got this kind of treehouse look, which is different to a normal village, for example. But as you upgrade them, they will take on a different look. So if you conquer this settlement and then upgrade it to a elven large town, then it will look different. But at the start of the campaign, these are the settlements you're looking for if you want hidden resource elves. Then most of the regions inhabited by dwarves at the start of the campaign will have hidden resource dwarves, and a lot of different regions will have hidden resource men because there's a lot of different human factions on the map, like Rohan, Gondor, Harad, the Eastlings, and then just a lot of the rebel settlements as well will have hidden resource men. So in general, you can build the trader in most places. Just bear in mind that if it's in one of those regions where there's not many trade routes, like in the forest, then a trader won't do much to you because it just provides a percentage increase to your existing trade income. In terms of other trade buildings, there are a few others. So there's ports, but there's nowhere close to you where you can actually build a port. The Rune Sea is over to the east here, but none of the regions on the coast can build ports. The closest place you can build a port will be on the coast, but that's quite far away from where you start, so that's not going to be helpful in the early game. In terms of other economy buildings, you've just got the roads, and I think that's it. Yeah, so we ran through the mines, the trader, and the ports. The last one would just be roads. So in order to build roads in a settlement, that settlement needs to have hidden resource roads, and a lot of the ones in the forest area and in the mountains don't have that, but just build them where you can. The elves are not restricted in terms of the roads building line. They get access to 2 tiers, which is as much as any faction, so you'll be able to get a small increase to your trade income from that. But I think that's probably about it for the economy. I'll generally try and get these regions quite early on just to get the mining income going, and then try and expand sort of north and east, because actually these settlements here, you can actually get a decent trading income from them because these have more trading routes. So yeah, I think that's about it. The economy is not too bad once you get it going. It's just a bit of a challenge in the early game. And the elven units actually are not that expensive. They can't really be expensive because the economy is not that good in general. So once you get going, you should be able to progress fairly efficiently. So just as a tip for population growth, even though the elves can't build farms and get the population growth from that, there are some population growth modifiers that exist in the other buildings. So if a region has hidden resource elves that we talked through before, which generally is just your starting settlements, and some of the neighbouring rebel regions, as it is for most of the elven factions, the government building, just being the first building in the tree here, gives you population growth. So Chamber of the Elders at tier 1 gives you 2.5%, and that scales down to 0.5% for the 5th tier. The 2nd tier at 1.5% is probably the sweet spot, because once you drop down to tier 3, that goes down to 0.5%. So just bear in mind it's not always worth it to upgrade straight away if you want to benefit from some increased population growth initially. There is also another building line, the water building line, shown here, and that will give you population growth as well. But you can only build these in regions that have hidden resource healing, and generally that's only some of the starting regions for a select number of factions. But just bear in mind that that building tree does exist in certain regions, and it's always worth going for that just to get the added population growth, particularly if you're using a city or region for recruiting, because recruiting will take units out of the population pool, so being able to get a bit more population growth in those regions, like in Karas Galadon, is always beneficial. In this section, I'm going to run through how the recruitment works. So like with the other elven factions, we have the training ground building line, which gives you access to your arch units, and the forge building line, which gives you access to your melee infantry units. So tier 1 of the training field gives you access to the elven archers, which are shared among all the elven factions. Tier 2 gives you the Lothlorien sentries, which are a specific arch unit for this faction. Tier 3 gives you access to the scout cavalry, which all the elven factions have access to, and then tier 4 just gives you some added bonuses to public order. Tier 1 of the forge gives you access to your Galadrim swords. Tier 2 gives you access to your spearmen, your Galadrim vanguards, and then tier 3 gives you access to the Galadrim swordsmen, and then also the Galadrim sentinels, but only in Karas Galadon. So there are restrictions on the building lines themselves. You can build tier 1 of the training ground and the forge in any settlement, but to be able to build beyond tier 1, you need that region to have hidden resource elves. So for example, in Karas Galadon, where we are just now, you can see the full building lines here. But if we go to Andrast, which is just a settlement I've taken for the purposes of this video, you'll see we can only build tier 1 of the trading field in the Forge, and that's because this region doesn't have hidden resource elves. And I did speak about which regions have hidden resource elves in the economy section, but just to reiterate that, generally the regions that have hidden resource elves are your starting regions plus some neighbouring rebel regions, and you can actually see on the campaign map which ones have hidden resource elves because they have a treehouse look. So if you look at Haldrith, for example, or Suna Gadal, they have a different look to the regular provinces. Now, obviously, if you take this region and upgrade it to an elven town or lodge town, it will look different, but at the start of the campaign, these are what the regions look like that have hidden resource elves. So generally, it's your starting regions plus neighbouring regions, and that's the same for the other elven factions as well, like the Sylvan Elves. You can see the regions that start close to them have hidden resource elves, and likewise for the Noldor Elves, you'll find some elven regions around there as well. So basically you need that hidden resource elves to be able to build the higher tiers of the training ground and the Forge and get access to your better units. So that's the restrictions on the building lines themselves. In terms of the units you can get from these buildings, there are also some added restrictions. So even though you can build tier 1 of the Forge or the training ground in any settlement, to be able to recruit the Elven Archers or the Galadrim swords, you need that region to not have hidden resource orc. So for example, in Andrast that we looked at before, this region doesn't have hidden resource orc, so we can still recruit our units from tier 1 of the training ground and Forge. But if we look at Nargruth, for example, which I captured for the purposes of this video, we can see that I cannot recruit any units from the training ground of the Forge, even though I can build tier 1, because this region has hidden resource orc. So it's just something to bear in mind, that when you start going after Mordor, you won't be able to recruit units from these regions. So that's the restrictions on the units themselves, and then obviously all the units from tier 2 and above require you to have hidden resource elves to build that building anyway, so that's a requirement of those units. Additionally, in terms of the Royal Forge, which is tier 3 of the Forge, there's only one Royal Forge that will give you access to your Galadrim Sentinels, and that's the Royal Forge in Gareth Galadon. So in order to recruit the Galadrim Sentinels, that region needs to have hidden resource Lothlorien, and Gareth Galadon is the only region in the game that has hidden resource Lothlorien. So those are your best units, and you can only get them from one place. In terms of added things for the Forge then, so if you capture Rivendell, which would be unlikely because it's controlled by the Noldor Elves, you can recruit the Imladrim Sentinels, which are a region-specific unit from tier 3 of the Forge there. And also if you conquer the Grey Havens, you can get the Mithlond Sentinels, which are a region-specific unit from tier 3 of the Forge there. But again, this region's under the control of the Noldor Elves, so it's unlikely you would be able to get that. So there is another military building, which is the port, because that does give you access to one unit, but as we discussed in the economy section, it's unlikely you'd be able to build ports in the early game, especially because the nearest place would be along the coast. So I wouldn't say that's that relevant, and the units themselves are not that good anyway. In terms of other things, you've obviously got your upgrade buildings, like with every faction, and it's best to build these in a place that you're not dependent on for money, because they all come with tax penalties. So somewhere close to your recruiting centre, like around here, would probably be best, where you can just send all your units for retraining. But I think that about covers it for how the recruitment works. Obviously, you need hidden resource elves to get your best settlements, and you obviously have hidden resource elves in your starting regions. The closest settlements with hidden resource elves are these 3 rebel regions, and then the closest ones after that are in the Forest of Mirkwood. So Dol Guldur also has hidden resource elves, as does some of the rebel regions neighbouring the Sylvan Elves. So if you can take these regions before they get there, that's always a bonus, and that will increase your recruiting capacity for some of your better units. So now we've run through the economy and recruiting, I just want to touch on campaign strategy. So if we look at our victory objectives here, we'll see we need to take 5 settlements, including Karas Galadon, Keren Amroth, and Barad-dûr. So obviously you start with Karas Galadon and Keren Amroth, so the only settlement you need to take is Barad-dûr, which is Mordor's capital. So even though taking 5 settlements sounds easy, you basically have to defeat Mordor to win the campaign. So in the early game, I would say the priority is to get the economy and infrastructure going. So in terms of economy, the best settlements to capture are the ones where you can build mines, because that's the most lucrative building tree in the absence of being able to build farms as the elves. So Moria, Barik Meled, and Zag Kala are all settlements in which you can build mines. So I would try to go for those fairly early. In terms of recruiting units, you need to recruit settlements that have hidden resource elves to get your best troops, as we discussed in the last section. So the settlements you want to go for are these 3 rebel regions here. They all have hidden resource elves, and you can tell that by the sort of treehouse look they have. Additionally, there are some other settlements nearby that have hidden resource elves, being Dol Guldur, and then some of the regions in the Mirkwood Forest. But these are the 3 you want to grab in the early game before some of the other factions go for them. So you basically want to get to tier 2 as quickly as possible, because that's where you get your armoured units, or tier 2 of the Forge, I should say. So the first armoured units you have access to are the Galadrim Vanguards from tier 2 of the Forge, and then you can get your swordsmen from tier 3 of the Forge. So you want to try and build up these regions here to start recruiting your armoured units that will give you a chance against Mordor. In terms of your strategic direction, you obviously have enemies on all sides. You've got the Orc Rabbles to the west, Mordor to the east at Dol Guldur, and then Isengard to the south. I'd say you probably want to deal with the Orc Rabbles first, because they become a bit of a nuisance if you don't deal with them. They start spilling out and taking all these settlements, and they'll send massive stacks of thousands of troops. So the best thing to do is just to go for Moria pretty quickly, take this as a choke point, and then expand north to take Zag Kala, and then if you can, try and go as far north as Cadrol Sin, because then you'll essentially have 2 choke points in the mountain regions, which means it will essentially lock off the Orc Rabbles from getting to you. So once you've taken those 3 regions, you've built up your economy, you've started taking some of these regions and these settlements, and you've got full armies or near full armies of the armoured units, you might want to start setting your sights on Mordor. So the easiest settlement to take is Dol Guldur, because it's isolated and it's quite close to you, and you can additionally take these settlements here, and these can expand your recruiting capabilities, because these also have hidden resource elves. When you do eventually go for Mordor, it is a challenge. They generally will have multiple full stacks by the time you get there, and it's not really going to be easy to just force your way in. So usually I try to get to a position where I've got 2 or 3 stacks of the armoured Galadrim units, and then just send them across the Dead Marshes. It's probably easier to approach from Minas Morgul and head in that way than to head through the Black Gates, but either way it will work. And then just remember when you're fighting against Mordor that once you kill Sauron, Mordor is destroyed as a faction, so you don't need to take all the regions here, you just need to go straight for Barad-dûr, and that is of course the victory objective for the Lothlorien Elves. Just make sure you have enough arch units to deal with Mordor's trolls before they reach the front line. So obviously Isengard are to the south, but they've rarely bothered me in campaigns, because Rohan doesn't act as a natural buffer. But yeah, overall it's a very fun campaign. I think the units look excellent, and once you get full armies of them, they are a very powerful faction. But with that, I'll move on to the unit showcase. I'm now going to do a full showcase of the units on the battlefield. I'd say this is potentially the best roster out of all the Elven factions, just because they do have the powerful elite units that the Greenwood Elves don't have, and they're able to access them a lot quicker than the High Elves can. The only real weakness in the roster is the lack of dedicated cavalry, but I'd say the melee infantry and archers more than make up for that. I'll start with the Elven Archers, which every Elven faction has access to via Tier 1 of the training grounds. They cost 400 gold and then 110 per turn thereafter, and they take 2 turns to recruit. In terms of their stats, their archer stats are obviously excellent, as you would expect for any Elven archer unit. The missile attack of 16 and missile range of 160 is bettered by very few units in the mod. The ammo of 25 is also pretty good for an archer unit, although just bear in mind that the unit size is quite low, which is a common occurrence for a lot of the Elven units, just bearing in mind how strong they are. The defense and attack is also on the low side, but I wouldn't be using these in melee combat. They're not going to be able to do much there, but overall just an excellent early game archer unit. Next we have the Lothlorien Sentries, which are the unique archer unit for the Elves of Lothlorien. They boast several upgrades over the Elven Archers, particularly the missile attack, which goes up to 19, and the range, which goes up to 180. Overall, these are absolutely brilliant archer units. I think there's only really general units and the high Noldor archers that are better than these. Again, the defense and melee attack of 6 is pretty low, and I wouldn't be expecting them to do much in the melee combat, but the archer stats are so good that I think you can forgive them for that. The ammo of 20 per soldier is slightly reduced compared to the Elven archers, but they do have a slightly higher unit size, so the ammo overall is fairly similar. But overall, these are absolutely excellent, although the Elven archers are so strong that I don't even know if you would need to upgrade. They cost 600 gold and then 170 upkeep per turn thereafter, and they take 2 turns to recruit. So it's up to you whether you want to invest the extra 60 gold per turn to get the slightly higher missile attack and range, but reduced ammo. Next we have the Elven Scout Cavalry. Every Elven faction has access to these via Tier 3 of the training grounds. They cost 690 gold and then 180 per turn thereafter, and they take 3 turns to recruit. As I said in most of my faction guides and overviews, I do think that missile cav in general are overpowered, and particularly these Elven units when you consider that their missile attack is 18 and the range 130. The only real balance on their power is the reduced unit size at 60 and the 15 ammo per soldier. But overall, just an excellent unit. I think Missile Cav would be an excellent addition to any roster, but particularly these with the strong archer stats. Next we have the Galadrim Swords, which come from Tier 1 of the Forge. These are your early game melee infantry units. They cost 380 gold and then 100 per turn. They also take 2 turns to recruit. In terms of their stats, they are overall decent units. The defense of 16 is on the lower end. The melee attack of 6 is actually pretty good. For an early game melee infantry unit, usually that's around 3, 4, or 5. And unlike a lot of the Elven units, they actually have a good unit size of 120. That's probably their redeeming feature, or their best feature. But they will get outscaled quite quickly just because of that low defense, so you would want to upgrade to the armored units like the Vanguards and the Galadrim Swordsmen. Yeah. But a very good early game unit, I would say. Then we move on to the first of the elite tier armoured Elves of Lothlorien units, being the Galadrim Vanguards. They're a spear unit. They cost 690 gold, 180 per turn, and they take 2 turns to recruit. So like with all the armoured Galadrim units, they have +2 hit points, which just adds to their tankiness and makes them quite tough to kill. Combined with that, they have an excellent defense of 24, a great melee attack of 7 on a spear unit. This is very high for a spear unit, and excellent morale of 37. They do have a fairly reduced unit size, as do most of the elite tier elven units, but I think the stats of the unit more than makes up for this. But you can get these from tier 2 of the Forge, so you can get these fairly early on, and they're an excellent unit. So definitely upgrade to these as soon as you can, because they will be able to perform much stronger than the Galadrim swords. Then we have the second of the elite tier armoured Galadrim units, the Galadrim Swordsman. Like with the Vanguards, they also have the +2 hit points to make them more tanky. They do cost 690 gold, have 190 upkeep cost per turn thereafter, and they take 2 turns to recruit. But like with the Vanguard, they're a very solid unit. The defense is decent at 22, melee attack of 8 is also solid, and then the morale is excellent at 37. The only real negative to speak of here is the reduced unit size at 81. But overall, just an excellent unit. And the good thing about the Swordsman and the Vanguard is that, unlike some of the other elite tier units, they only take 2 turns to recruit. So you can build these up fairly quickly and make full armies of them. But overall, an excellent unit. You can get these from tier 3 of the Forge. Then we move on to the most elite warriors of the Elves of Lothlorien, the Galadrim Sentinels. You can only get these from tier 3 of the Forge in Caris Galadon, which is your starting capital. They cost 850 gold, have a 250 upkeep cost per turn thereafter, and they take 3 turns to recruit. So these are a hybrid melee and arch unit, and they are very strong in both areas, with a missile attack of 19 and missile range of 180, which is only really bettered by general units and the high Noldor archers. The defense of 18 and the melee attack of 8 combined with the +2 hit points also means they are very good in melee combat as well. But they're just an all-round excellent unit. The only real negative is the reduced unit size at 61, which is even lower than the Swordsman and the Vanguard. But obviously, because of the stats, they did need to balance this in some way. But overall, an absolutely fantastic unit, and definitely one you'd want to use in your campaigns. So up next we have the Imladrim Sentinels and the Mithlond Sentinels, which go hand in hand. I really just have them in here for completeness, because it's unlikely you'd be able to get access to them during your campaigns. The Imladrim Sentinels are only recruitable from tier 3 of the Forge in Rivendell, and the Mithlond Sentinels are only recruitable from tier 3 of the Forge in the Grey Havens, and both of those settlements are under the control of the High Noldor Elves at the start of the game. So it's unlikely you'll be able to get control of those throughout your campaign, so I'll just cover them briefly. They're quite similar to the Galadrim Sentinels in that they are melee and arch units combined. They take 3 turns to recruit, have quite a high cost, and also a high upkeep per turn. But they're just, they're units that have good defense and attack, which makes them useful in melee combat, and they have really good archer stats as well. The only real advantage of these Sentinel units over the Galadrim Sentinels is that they have a higher unit size, but as we discussed before, it's unlikely to get access to them, so I just wanted to show them in the unit roster, as it is possible to recruit them. So now we move on to the General's Bodyguard units, of which there are 2. Firstly, you have the generic General's Bodyguard, the Twilight Guards, and then you have the Galadrim Elite Sentinels, which accompany 2 generals at the start of the campaign, being Haldir and Rimmel. But once Haldir and Rimmel die, you'll never be able to recruit the Elite Sentinels again, so try not to lose them if you can. But the Twilight Guards are essentially just very good sword units. They have excellent defense and the +3 hit points, which makes them very, very tough to kill. And they also have respectable melee attack, so if you get a bunch of these units into an army, that army will be very strong. You can basically just steamroll through enemy territory at that point. But overall, an excellent general unit, and one of the reasons why the Elves are so strong in the late game. So next up we have the Galadrim Elite Sentinels, which are very similar to the Galadrim Sentinels. They just have +3 hit points instead of +2. They have 19 defense instead of 18, and then a missile attack of 20 instead of 19. So as I said before, there are two generals that have these as their bodyguard at the start of the campaign, being Haldir and Rimmel. And overall, everything that I said about the Sentinels really just applies here. The only real disadvantage of this unit is the reduced unit size again. So in the campaign, they start with 48, but they won't replenish above 28, I think. So it's quite a low unit size for a general. But I do like just having variety in generals units. It just adds a bit of immersion and enriches the experience. So yeah, a great unit. Not much more to say. Last but not least, we have the Teleri Marinas, which are the only unit that is recruitable from the port. These are skirmish units, so the missile attack looks quite high, but then the range and ammo is also quite low. They do actually have the +2 hit points, which makes them more tanky, but as I was saying before, there isn't really any regions close enough to be able to build the port, at least not in the early to mid-game. So this unit's not really that relevant, but just remember it is there if you want to use it. So that's going to be it for the faction guide and overview for the Lothlorien Elves. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.